Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Lorraine Lanfried, the Senior Vice President in the Civil Sector at Booz Allen Hamilton. Lorraine, great to have you here.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, and we're here today to talk about software modernization, and agencies are continuing to evolve their approach to how they develop, buy, procure software. But something that keeps popping up is this concept of a software factory. Just to level set at the beginning, what is a software factory and why are they important for agencies?
Sure. So at the highest level, software factory is made up of people, process, and tools. So it's a solution delivery framework and a collection of tools that are implemented in a series, so like an assembly line, that's used to develop and maintain various large enterprise applications. In a large organization like a federal agency. There's also a human component to a factory. There's teams of developers who are experts at the end-to-end development process or manufacturing process.
Got it.
And so the reason that their software factories are important is that they solve a ton of problems. I kind of see them as the next big evolutionary step in how we approach IT development. So like agile development and DevSecOps were really big deals that I'm sure you've talked a lot about before because they significantly speeded up delivery as well as reducing risk. And so while DevSecOps and Agile are great at that, there's really nothing that addresses getting rid of technical debt. So you can go a lot faster, you can be a lot more reliable, but there's nothing to stop you from continuing to just sort of add to the landscape of what a CIO has to support. And so software factories, I think are, now's the right time for software factories because as we're moving away from looking at just individual systems or projects and taking more of a product line and portfolio approach, a software factory is a natural complement to that because it gives you a common set of tools and processes that can be used by multiple development teams that are solving similar problems, and it lets us put more accelerators and more powerful tools in place. So things like test automation and developer self-service types of tools, all the way to the other end of automation testing and validation of security controls, right? You get all of that done consistently, more affordably, and more reliably. So so they're super important, I think, right now.
Got it. That's really helpful. I mean, and obviously agencies aren't just establishing these software factories around one program and then you're done.
Right.
It's around product lines. Are those product lines organized across the enterprise typically? Is it organized around specific mission sets? How are these organized?
So the location of a software factory within the management structure of an agency, it shouldn't get confused with like where the software can be deployed. So like a car, you can build a car at a factory in Michigan, but you can drive that car anywhere. An application that's built in a software factory can be administered at really whatever level the enterprise wants to use for deployment to really any environment that makes sense. So you could use a software to build something, but you could deploy it within an agency. You could deploy it to like Azure or Google Cloud or AWS. So it really changes sort of how we think about the system stack. And it can also be used for any target audience, whether that's internal to the agency or for applications that are used by the public.
And I guess it kind of productizes that agile DevSecOps approach that then a sort of like mission office can go and say, hey, we need something here, can you help us out?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of agencies would really love to be able to say, here it is, here's our enterprise software factory. Um, and but a lot of times, even within an agency, they're serving very different missions. So, depending on mission alignment and what sort of technical environment they're coming from, it might make sense to do things more around like mission and product lines that support that mission rather than at the whole agency level. Probably the most important factor is that civilian agencies should really be thinking just about getting started, period. If you're building cars by hand today and you get to the opportunity to bring in, a component to paint the cars, then you're going to start saving time and money, improving quality, improving consistency, solving problems in IT incrementally has been proven successful over and over again. It's really just, the important message is to start. And it's really no different with software factories. The more that they can leverage cloud platforms, the more that they can leverage shared solutions, then the better they'll be performance-wise, as well as, being able to free up developers' time to focus on things that are important for the mission.
So that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned agencies just need to get started down this path. Obviously, there's kind of a foundation that you need to have in place, cloud and things like that, before I guess you move on to a software factory. But beyond that, how should agencies get started down this road with the software factory approach? What are some best practices, I guess?
Since we're thinking of, I'll stick with my assembly line kind of analogy, right? So continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline, CIDC, CI/CD is a really important sort of foundational block for that assembly line in DevSecOps. So then it's like any IT investment, right? Identifying what objectives it is you want to achieve, and then making a solid plan, whether it's a functional type of requirement or a non-functional type of requirement. Something to do with zero trust architecture, for example. What's the outcome you want to achieve, and then what's your opportunity to invest in that? A lot of agencies that we work with, they'll take a large system modernization project and use that as really the opportunity to kind of fund that first instantiation. And it's really just designing things a little bit more thoughtfully so that you're not building it just to be used by one development team to solve one problem, but really opening the aperture of, okay, how are we going to onboard other products into this, and really pivot from being a purpose-built DevSecOps pipeline to being something that can be shared across products or even at an enterprise level.
Yeah, I mean, and if you have one centralized place that's kind of taking in those requirements, then they can say, hey, we received this requirement from this office, we also received this one, there's some overlap here,
right.
We can share.
And reduces quite a bit of risk, right?
Right.
If you've got people working in silos, eventually they're going to, whether it's sharing credentials for identity and access management, or it's sharing a common data store that's central to a mission. At some point, someone's going to need data from someone else, right? So
Right.
to the extent that you're showing up through the same front door, the same security procedures, defining as much as you can up front and taking a lot of just the differences of ways teams approach that, and putting standards in place, and having those standards not just, hey, here's a design pattern and you hope someone follows it, but having the tooling in place so that there's only one way to get into a factory, and there's one or two assembly lines you can go down once you're in the front door. It really reduces those surprises.
Got it. And security is such a big emphasis at agencies these days. Software security has become a major focus after the May 2021 Cybersecurity Executive Order. How does the software factory kind of help agencies with those security considerations that are piling up?
And again, sort of like I said before, rather than having development teams solve the same challenge over and over again in slightly different ways, by building a lot of the solutions into your software factory, You get your best people on it. You get consistency. So you've got, again, if you're going to put your product into the software factory, what you're going to get out of that is, you're going to get logs created a certain way. You're going to have those logs connected to enterprise monitoring. You're going to, you can start putting, machine learning ops tools on top of those, and you're not having to go and retrofit every application that you have. As applications come into the factory, that uniformity allows you to put yourselves in a much, much better security posture.
Yeah, I mean, security is obviously such a key factor in all these conversations. But software development approaches evolve really quickly. Obviously, we went from waterfall to agile in the space of, a couple decades at most. How can these factories stay effective well into the future?
So one thing that we haven't talked about yet with the software factory is that just like with a physical factory, not only do you get a process that that's available for people to bring their product through their software and sort of put it through, but in terms of running the factory for an agency or any large enterprise, you get a much fuller, clearer picture of actually what's operationally happening on the factory floor. In IT, we'll never get away from having some surprises, but generally surprises are not good, right? And so by having the factory approach really helps you prevent those surprises, which could, be things like security vulnerabilities. So you've got a lot fewer surprises when you run software through a factory because you've got visibility into what's happening at every step. So to use your, and that visibility is like a formalized visibility, whether it's, monitoring, security alerts, regression testing, you know exactly what percentage of your code has been regression tested, how many times penetration testing has been performed in the pre-production environment, right? And so, again, as we get closer and closer to zero trust, having that assurance and that confidence that exactly not just one team is doing, but all of the teams as the factories grow and offer more components and more tooling. If you're an agency CIO, that's a much more comfortable feeling, knowing, right, wrong, or indifferent, just, having some fidelity and visibility into what's happening.
Sure, having a process in place to
well,
account for
and
this.
a process and sort of physical instantiation and evidence, right? That you'll get reports back and dashboards, so not only that process is there, but that it's actually being used. You'll get real-time data and alerts. Which is another thing, right? The first for products that are using the same process, if all of a sudden a vulnerability is found in one, you immediately know where to go look in the others. So it's
I'm thinking of Log4j. That's coming to mind immediately.
Being a lot of time was taken just to figure out, right? In some places, who's using it, what is our exposure, right? Once the more you embrace that factory model, much easier question to ask.
Yeah. Well, are there any other challenges, that agencies are facing, internal, external to these factories, workforce, data tagging, anything along those lines?
I know personally on the program I'm on, we've grown tremendously. It's an enterprise level supporting sort of multiple agencies, and we've grown from 400 people when it was awarded. It was a recompete. We're now at 1,100 people, over 1,100 people on this program. And so not only is that just a lot of work to maintain oversight and quality standards and everything else, but just as you're bringing new developers into a program, right? Where do I get my database access? How do I find this data? How do I call credentialing services? By moving to the software factory model, onboarding and orientation is a lot more straightforward, and we can make people productive much, much faster. through what had started as a DevSecOps platform and is now, by connecting all the tools together, is sort of like an early instantiation of a factory.
All right.
So it's it's kind of like a win all the way around.
I'd like to thank my guest, Lorraine Lanfried, the Senior Vice President in the Civil Sector at Booz Allen Hamilton. Lorraine, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Again, I'm your moderator, Justin Doubleday, and you're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Booz Allen Hamilton.